Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It's thunderstorming outside, there's lightning, there's rain. It's the perfect weather for this kind of video. I wanted to share with you some of my favorite books that have an effed up family dynamic. It's one of the themes that I enjoy in thrillers and horrors and mysteries and gothic fiction. So if you are on the same page, you're going to enjoy this video. The first book that I want to talk about is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This book encapsulates everything I love about gothic fiction, including a very well-crafted suspense and interesting multi-layered characters that jump from the page. The story follows a young woman named Margaret. She is a wannabe biographer. She's not very well known, but she's written a few biographies of other people and she's very proud of that work. But she is stuck at her parents' store, and that is what she believes her life is going to be until she's summoned by the means of a letter by a very enigmatic, very famous writer, Miss Winter. Miss Winter is notorious in the field not only because of her writing, but also because people do not believe that she'd written one true word about herself ever. She says that she's ready to tell all, she's on the verge of dying, and she wants her true story to see the light of day. Not only that appeals to Margaret, and she immediately agrees to be the writer of this woman's biography, she also is slightly obsessed with her. She's been following her career and she really loves her writing. So Margaret moves to Miss Winter's creepy mansion to be a live-in biographer, and they meet up for daily sessions to cajole Miss Winter to tell her story. She also is so used to lying that it's hard for her to trust someone with her truth. It also turns out that Margaret has secrets of her own, and in many ways they are just as dark and just as complicated as the mysteries that Miss Winter holds. It's a very atmospheric, very eerie book with well-paced plot twists and revelations. It also allows space for the characters to introspect on their past experiences. I would say that it's not only a story about these women's lives, it's also a story of the two families, and that's why I feature it in this video. Both Margaret and Miss Winter have complicated relationships with their families. They're also both the black sheeps of their families, so they immediately feel a connection because of it. It's an excellent book. I devoured it so quickly because the pacing of the suspense is so well done. The characters are untrustworthy, they are not reliable narrators, and it makes the whole experience of reading this book even more delicious because throughout the majority of it, it's hard to tell what actually is the truth and what actually is fiction. The next book is the only one that is gonna be young adult. It's Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power. It has a mystical element to it, so it's not gothic fiction. I would say it is sci-fi but set in a contemporary world. It has elements of body horror, so if that's something that you cannot handle, I would skip it. But I found this one so deeply fascinating. It's also extremely fast-paced, and I read it in one night, which never happens. The story follows a young girl named Margot. She's been pretty isolated by her mother. They've been together for as long as she remembers. She doesn't know any other relatives, any other friends, and she never answers Margot's questions about the past or if they actually have someone else in the family. She just doesn't want to share anything, and they live an odd life of isolation, but also it feels like they're always on the run. Margot's mother has a bad habit of pawning their things for money, so Margot often buys it back, and one time she buys back something that is the key to her past. She finds a photograph of her mother as a girl with an address of a town called 𝕊𝕆𝕙𝕀𝔸𝕃 on the back of the photo, and she decides to pursue this hint and go back to 𝕊𝕆𝕙 to hopefully find someone who knows her mother, who can explain why her mother is on the run or why it feels this way, and who can finally connect the dots for Margot. She's hopeful that this experience is going to change her life, and it indeed changes her life, but it's more than what she's bargained for. I do not want to spoil a lot of things for you when it comes to this book, because the plot twists and the revelations are somewhat explosive and they come pretty quickly. If you want something action-packed and entertaining, but at the same time something deeply complicated and effed up, but also at the same time something that has a lot to say about leaving toxic family behind and cutting contact, I highly recommend this book. It's deeply weird in the style of Jeff Vandermeer because the elements of body horror are intertwined with nature horror. It also has a lot to say about the horrors of being a woman, which is another theme that I like when a horror story basically explores femininity and explores being a woman from an angle of horror. I love that, though I usually am not a big fan of horror. This is an exception for me. The next book is brilliant and I think booktube really loved it, but I have not seen it mentioned since it came out. It is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and it's a story set in Nigeria about two sisters that are weirdly codependent. Karidi is the older sister. She's a young professional and she is constantly saving her younger sister and is constantly cleaning up after her. So people with troubled siblings and with siblings that are always the problem in the family that you somehow have to cover for and be responsible for will relate. Ayola, the youngest sister, is constantly killing her boyfriends, and Karidi, because of an inflated sense of responsibility, is always helping her get away with it. But when Ayola sets her eyes on a doctor who works with Karidi in the same hospital and who Karidi has the eyes for, she starts rethinking her strategy and her loyalty to her sister. Yes, the family may come first, but for how long? This was brilliant and surprisingly short. The story could have gone on, but I appreciate how Oyinkan Braithwaite managed to fit so much into this novella. She just brought up so many familial dynamic things that are interesting to read about. It's the dynamic where the older sister always has to have her youngest sister's back because of how abusive their family background is and because of how used to protecting her she is. Their father was an abusive, angry, spiteful man, and he was abusing both daughters, which created this trauma bond, this dynamic where they felt like they had to always have each other's back. And it's the toxic loop that Karidi cannot seem to escape. The next book is Midwinterblood by Marcus Sedgwick, very much a book that is catered to my tastes. It is not a family dynamic, it is a village dynamic, which feels very incestuous and very family-like. Midwinterblood is set in a few periods of time but starts with a close future and follows a man named Eric who's a journalist and who goes to this remote island that is very mysterious and secretive that he wants to write an article on. The people on the island live very simple, very old school lives. They do not use electricity, they do not use modern technology at all. They are very, very grounded and they prefer to live how their ancestors live. Eric wants to figure out why and if it is really perhaps a satisfying way of living, but also find a very, very rare orchid that only grows on this island. When he arrives to the island, he quickly becomes distracted from his initial mission and realizes that perhaps his past life did not matter that much and he might actually want to stay here. But also at the same time, he starts forgetting why he came to the island in the first place. We start in the future and we go back into the past and we see how these people lived in the past on the island, and we realize that the time changes but the names of the people don't. It's a very, very interesting story and I loved putting the whole thing together. My favorite thing about suspense is putting things together and figuring out the answer. So I love these kinds of books. I love non-linear, I love different time periods. It's just something that I enjoy. There's also a romantic sort of soulmate type of story in the center of it, which also is very appealing. The dynamic in the village is pretty effed up though, and these people are as close as family, so it counts. An outlier on this list, The Good Daughter by Karin Slaughter. An outlier because it's a whole different genre. It's the only mystery thriller, but what makes it unforgettable in my opinion is the family dynamic. It is particularly toxic. It follows two women that in the past, as teenagers, were attacked by the enemies of their father. Their father was a famous lawyer who took cases of people that most would not protect, rapists, child molesters, just horrible pieces of shit. And honestly, he did not care for the crime of it. He cared for the craft of it, as in he cared that he's being a good lawyer, as in doing his job. So their house was burned to a crisp. They had to move, and when they moved, their house was attacked. The two sisters suffered horrible trauma that they never recovered from, but they took different paths in life. One remained in their town and continued to have a relationship with their father, and the other moved and cut ties with her father. The one that remained in town, Charlie, followed in her father's footsteps and became a lawyer herself. In the start of the novel, she gets an impossible case of heroin where a child shoots up a bunch of people in her school. More so, the crime happens in her presence, but she decides to represent this girl in court like her father would once do. Her sister that's strayed from the family, Charlotte, comes back to town as well, and this case brings out a lot of the unhealed trauma that both of them carry. It's a very violent book. Karin Slaughter is not afraid of describing violence in detail, so it might not be for everyone, but I felt like this book was so raw emotionally. I love the point of views of both Charlotte and Charlie and how differently they processed their trauma, how complicated the story got, how much Karin Slaughter was willing to go there. It's a very, very good mystery thriller and I highly recommend it. To me, it's more than a mystery thriller because it's so deeply rooted in psychology. The next story that I would like to recommend is a gothic novel, Starling House by Alix E. Harrow. It is about a town named Eden where people all know each other, and a girl named Opal who is fascinated by an old haunted house in their little town that a lot of people gossip about. She's obsessed with it because the family that supposedly own it, that live there, never really show themselves to the townies. They never participate in anything. Everything that they need kind of comes to their house, be it people or things. They do not participate in the town gossip, in the town celebrations. They do not go to the local store to buy produce. So Opal has been fascinated by it for the longest time. She's been researching it, researching the people that owned it in the past, especially this writer that has written a story very similar to Alice in the Wonderland that is extremely popular but also is banned in a lot of places because of how scary it is, despite it being written for children. Opal also cares for her younger brother since their mother died in a car crash, and her way of coping with it was to become even more entangled with the mystery of the house. One day she goes to the house to snoop around, as she does, and she sees a young man. The name of the man is Arthur, and he surprisingly agrees to take Opal in as a housekeeper into the mansion. Arthur is surprisingly young and somewhat friendly, which is unusual for the members of that family, which allows Opal to snoop around the house and figure out its mysteries. It is a gothic novel with elements of fantasy, so there are some mystical things happening in this house, which I'm not going to reveal. There's also a romance between Opal and Arthur, which takes a significant part of the story. I thought this novel broke a lot of rules. The mystery behind it was interesting, and I found it fascinating. The lore surrounding the house was well thought out. I also love the familiar relationship between Opal and her younger brother. It was precious. It also explores the conflicts in the family, the conflicts that Arthur has with his legacy, with his family, and the issues that Opal has with her mother, or had with her mother. She never actually knew who her father is, which is a big issue, the big thing for Opal in general. And one of the reasons why she is trying to figure out someone else's family tree, because she doesn't have a control of her own family tree. A very solid gothic novel with some fresh new elements. The last thing on my list is Diavola by Jennifer Thorne. I'm not going to try an Italian accent because Italian I do not speak. I speak a little Spanish and a little Romanian, which is close, but not that close. This is a story that I could encapsulate into a sentence. Hell is other people. That is it. The story is about Anna that goes on an annual vacation with her family. Her parents are pretty wealthy and they take their children and their spouses and kids to a destination of choice every year. This time it's a small village in Tuscany. It's beautiful and picturesque, and they are trying to cram as much into it as possible. They rent a remote villa for authenticity, and they quickly regret it. Not only they themselves have a very weird dynamic where Anna is the black sheep without a particular reason. The villa is very odd, very creepy, very mysterious. A lot of poltergeisty type stuff starts happening in it. It is famously haunted apparently, but they didn't know that. So it becomes worse. It's not a very conventional haunted house story too, and I really enjoyed it. It's an interesting setting as well because Italy is not usually associated with ghosts and hauntings and creepy stuff. We usually associate vacations in Italy with sunshine, with linen dresses, with seeing culture and art and enjoying good food and wine, just relaxing and feeling out your body in the nature. But this twist weirdly worked. The reason why I read this is because there's a small paragraph at the end of the synopsis that is particularly appealing to me personally. May invoke feelings of irritation, dread, and despair that come with large family gatherings. That's all you need to know about this novel. It's incredible, and the family dynamics are truly delicious. These are all the books that I wanted to recommend to you in this video. Thank you for watching. If you reached this point, leave a black heart emoji in the comments, and I will see you soon with another video. But until then,